Zera Shimshon, we're not stopping just because Charles isn't here.
There's a tzedakah box.
So for anyone who wants to buy, there are some storm outside. Anyone wants to buy, is there a change in there?
One shekel maybe. Not big money.
No, it's not even a shekel, it's a penny. All right, so what we're going to do is like this. We're going to take, there's about 3 or 4 of them that I found. We're going to try to do like last week where we're going to do a few short ones. We'll start with, we're going to go out of order, not the logical order. We're going to do only because our good friend Yaakov here just asked a good question.
You always ask a question.
Yeah, he asked a good question. So we're going to start with number 16, Ted Zayin.
Not that Zion.
Shemot Ted Zayin. It's a good one. It's a good one to start with because it's relevant, and then we'll work our way backwards. Let's see if we can end them. Okay. Midrash Rabbah. Okay. So this one is based on. Just find the pasuk. Yes. Okay. So now, if we go to the psukim of this week's parsha, we'll start with this. We always got to read the pasuk first. So we go to the end. This is right towards the end where Hashem, where Moshe, quote unquote, complains to Hashem, saying, God, you brought me into this mess, right? You brought me in to be a leader, and all of a sudden,
Things have only gone worse.
It's gone worse. Exactly.
Typical leadership problem.
Right, right leadership problem. Exactly. And now, if you go to the end, where's the pasuk? The pasuk is yeah. Okay. The last pasuk of the parsha actually. It says, "Vayomer Adonai el Moshe ata tireh asher aseh leFaro ki biyad chazaka yishalchem biyad chazaka yigarshem me'artzo." So Hashem says to Moshe, "You're going to see." Ata meaning with an ayin means now you'll see that you're going to see what I'm going to do to Paro, right? So basically, Hashem basically tells him, "You wait, you just wait and see, buddy." Challenge accepted, right? So the Zera Shimshon says, he quotes a midrash, in the Midrash Rabbah. It says as follows: "B'milchemet Paro atar roeh, ve'en atar roeh b'milchemet perek Ted Zayin." Torah Ted Zayin, 16. Okay, so it says, Midrash Rabbah says that you will see that now, the word now, right, means ata, right, that there's another meaning that ata, not later. Exactly. So the Midrash says, B'milchemet paro ata roeh, ve'en ata roeh b'milchemet lamed alaf hamlachim. Okay, you're not going to see, you will not, that's right, the Yoshua, that's when Bnei Yisrael conquer Eretz Yisrael. So that's already the midrash. Now that question, the Zera Shimshon asked a question. He says 3 questions. What's the connection between Eretz Yisrael, meaning Moshe now, the situation right now, and the battle of the 30 kings later on? The second question he asks is, what's the question? Why are we talking about war? We don't know of any war that really happened. Number 16, if anyone doesn't follow yet. For those who aren't following, and the last question you ask is, Lama davka atar roeh? Why do you say you will see? Right? Why do you have to use atar tireh? Like, why use that term? Right? So he says the word you will see. Right? The midrash implies that okay. So he says here, so this word you will see. The midrash implies that these words all lead to a sense of Moshe's sin, meaning that there's some sort of atar tireh, atar roeh. Right, so the midrash says, "B'milchemet paro ata roeh," you will see milchemet paro, and there's something that the midrash is kind of giving some sort of implication there that we're going to find out what it's all about. Now this is based on. So let's start with the answer. Now we'll go with the answer. The focus of this is really about the idea of Moshe's complaint, the punishment that he got, and also Eretz Yisrael in general. And this might actually also answer some questions as to why Moshe wasn't allowed to go into Eretz Yisrael, which is your question. Okay, and it's also important for us, and even for us nowadays. If later on we'll see that even if we see what happened to Moshe, us. who are fortunate enough to live in Israel. So he says, "V'yesh lomar the midrash hanal." In other words, the midrash above, Chaim. Al pasuka kodem lama hareot lama zeh. So he says, go to the midrash. If you go to the same midrash, just the one pasuk earlier, it says, "Matzinu shetar omet Moshe haya manishtana ha'amazeh mishar umot haolam shenishtabed begalut Mitzrayim." Right. So he says, "Is why this typical question? Why is this nation different? Meaning, why is Bnei Israel so different than all the other nations of the world? That they got, they were quote unquote fortunate enough to be exiled to Mitzrayim." So he says, "V'i mishum kigeri azaracha hayalo ishtabed le'esav le'ishmael." So if the midrash there says, Moshe basically kind of comes back and says, "Why is it Bnei Israel suffering? What about if we're saying is Yazaracha? So it should be also who else is the Zera of Avraham Avinu? Yisrael and Ishmael and Esav."
I think that is not saying that. He's saying that why Dafka to Egypt, they could have been enslaved to Esav and Ishmael.
According to the English here, it says here, and if one were to answer that, it's because of the verse, like Geri Azaracha. Then it says it says Hashem should have subjected the descendants of Esav and Ishmael to slavery too. That's what it says here.
In Hebrew, it says "Halo lishtabed le'esav uleishmael."
Right. I think he's saying why is it faced specifically for Yaakov's descendants and not Abraham's descendants? That's what he says here. Let's look at the midrash. That midrash we can look at later. So he says here, "V'yadua shematanat Eretz Yisrael lo ba'al Yisrael ela yedei shesavlu ol hagalut b'Mitzrayim." And he says we know that the gift of Eretz Yisrael was given to Bnei Israel because they were willing to accept, or they accepted, or they endured the punishment or the suffering of Mitzrayim, the Galut Mitzrayim, as it says, as Rashi says, Al pasuk vayelech el eretz mipnei Yaakov achiv. That's pasuk in Bereshit. And it says, "Mipnei shtar chov shel gezerat kigeri azarcha mutal azar shitzchak amar elech mikan ein yichelek b'matana shenitna lo haaretz azot v'lo piron hashtar." So he says he says that the Rashi explains in that pasuk that he says that because there was a contract of debt that was imposed on Bnei Israel, and once Esav saw the contract, he said, "Well, if I see that contract says basically that Yaakov and Bnei Israel are promised the land of Eretz Israel, and therefore Esav says, well, I've got nothing for me, so I'm leaving, I'm out." Right? Right? It's not. Let's get out of Dodge. Right? So he says here. That's what he says. If I have no part in this matana, so therefore, and I can't, nor in the payment of the contract of that, meaning I'm not gonna, in order to get this, right? I'm being enslaved. So why do I have to be here? So I'm out. So that's what Esav does. Being clean, ein makom klal l'shabed bnei Esav v'Yishmael, and therefore there's no basis for Hashem to really put bnei Esav and Yishmael in slavery. They have no share in the land of Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, if that's the question, then what do we have? Then if we use that midrash, then we have a bigger question. What was really what? Then he says, "V'kashel Moshe lama nitraim b'chinam." If that's the case, then why did Moshe complain for nothing? Right? Moshe complained that the burden of exile should be evenly distributed across all the nations of the people the descendants of Abraham. But if the case is that if it was only meant to be awarded only to Bnei Israel, then Moshe's complaint is really not a good complaint, right? Okay, so Mikol Shekain, he says, and it's also more difficult because Kodem Lachen Gilalu HaKadosh Baruch Hu Davar Zeh, and he says, V'omar E'aleh Etchem Me'oni Mitzrayim El Eretz Avatchala B'dvash. And he says even more so if we look right before this, like earlier in the Parshat, Hashem says to Moshe, I'm going to take you out of Eretz Mitzrayim. I'm going to take you to the land of milk and honey, right? So then Moshe Kolmar Masha Aniti Otam Begalut Mitzrayim Lo Haya Ki'im LeTovatam Kedei Sheyirshua Ha'aretz HaTovah. So therefore, he says Hashem. Basically, what is Hashem saying to him? He's saying to him is this whole suffering that you're now getting, that the suffering is going to only be that much sweeter when you go into Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, what do we really understand from this? We really understand that Moshe was really already aware of the benefit of the slavery, right? And if he was already aware of the benefit of the slavery, quote unquote, the benefit, if you can call it that, right? So therefore, then we have to really understand is what is he complaining about?
Maybe the outcome.
What?
Maybe the outcome.
Okay, the outcome, not the benefit. Okay, but right, he uses the word benefit. That's why Alex uses the word benefit.
I haven't read following points, but if you look at the context of Moshe's complaint, it's not about the future, it's just that he as a leader was trying to help Bnei Israel.
Right.
And in that immediate period of time, anything he did only made it worse. So maybe like in the long term, that would be a good question.
Yeah.
But in that immediate point.
So that is, from what I recall, I don't think that's the direction he takes, although that is not a bad answer.
Right.
Your answer is right. Yesterday I was listening to a shir from, what was it? Rav Asher Weiss, and he says, Tachacham. Like every person gave him an answer, says, Tachacham, like without, he didn't want to tell him, like, that's a bad answer. He just said, good approach. No, your answer is right. Your answer is right. I don't think it was a bad answer. Actually, it's a good answer. So he says here, what he says here, he goes, in order for this to understand, we have to really basically look a little bit deeper into what Moshe's sin was, quote unquote, if there is a sin. And even though Moshe, let's just say that Moshe really did complain, צריך לומר שדעתו הייתה שאין הארץ כל כך ראויה וחשובה לסבול עליה טורח שעבוד כזה, אף על פי שהיא ארץ טובה. ואם כן, משה פגם בחשיבות הארץ חס ושלום. So he says, if Moshe really did complain, which we see that he did, then we have to say that basically Moshe really intention was that he thought that maybe Eretz Yisrael wasn't as good, quote unquote, as, it can't be, basically he's saying is, God, I don't care what you're selling me right now, like if you look at it this way, again, chas v'chalila, I'm not saying what Moshe thought, but if I understood what the Zera Shimshon is saying is, God and Moshe are talking, God says, I promise you we're going to date, what's with all this suffering? And Hashem says to him, don't you worry, I'm going to take you to the land of milk and honey. It's all going to be good.
It's going to be Shabbat.
Yeah, it's going to be Shabbat, right? Right, right, exactly. I was just saying, like, I don't care how good, whatever you sell me right now, look what's going on over there, right? So he's saying is, how good could it be to be worth what the suffering that's going on right now, right? And God forbid, are we saying, could we be saying that God forbid that Moshe is really complaining about the benefit of Eretz Yisrael? So he says, the Zera Shimshon now goes back to the Midrash, and he says, Mishum hachi amar lo ata tireh, v'melchemet paro ata roeh, ve'en ata roeh. This is why now you will see Paro, but you won't see Eretz Yisrael, the 31 kings, meaning the battle of, like you said, Yoshua. Klomar, halo minaga ulamhu. This is so perfect for right now. Im am echad o melech echad yotze lichbosh midina achat tzarich sheyaseh imam milchama b'tzar gadol. Okay. It is a manner, we know that the way the world works is that if one king or one nation wants to take over another nation, he's got to go big war, right? You're not going to have a small war if you really want the land, right? V'chan Yisrael, and here in the case of Bnei Israel, lefisha savlu ol hagalut b'Mitzrayim niftaru mitzar hamilchama, because they endured such bad suffering in Mitzrayim, they basically exempt themselves from the hardships of going into Eretz Yisrael, from the battle. So in a normal fashion, in a normal way, you would say, if Eretz Yisrael wants to, Bnei Israel want to capture the land, or they want to, got to conquer it, right? But because the suffering that they endured, which we know is basically the epitome and also the model for all future suffering of all future exiles, galuyot. So therefore, yes, in a general time, we would have to have a wage of war. But because the suffering was so bad, though what we're basically saying is that the Jewish people's suffering was the milchama. In other words, it was instead of the galut, instead of what the Midrash says is ata roeh b'milchemet paro. The milchama of paro is what the Zera Shimshon is basically implying, is that the milchama of paro it's not really a milchama like a war. It's rather the suffering. I mean, the suffering is as the equivalent of a war, is what he's saying.
What do you mean it's a war for Paro?
Meaning the suffering that we took, the Bnei Israel took in Mitzrayim, was like us fighting a war, right? Because what happens in war, people unfortunately die, people, they're suffering, etc., etc. So the suffering that we endured during that time.
What's the suffering for Paro?
No, it's not for Paro. It's more saying is you will see the battle of Paro. Meaning Hashem is saying to Moshe, you will see right now the battle, quote unquote, the suffering that Bnei Israel happened, the suffering that will happen right now. The way he says it is the ordinary, which meant, okay, he says here the Jewish people suffering may be alluded to by the term battle. In other words, he's saying is that the gift that they will get of Eretz Yisrael is worth the suffering, the battle that they had to endure, which is like a battle that they had to endure to get to Eretz Yisrael.
They paid for it with their suffering.
Correct. That's a good way to say it. They paid for it with their suffering.
Meaning the exile reduced the war, the level of war that they had to have
Correct.
in order to.
Correct. And here it says, Sharei asu milchamot im ka'aknanim b'derech nes bli shum tzar. V'chein asu kshe'yatzu mitzrayim ki Hashem nilcham lahem. V'chein amar milchemet paro ata ro'eh v'i ata ro'eh. So this is why, if you look at after Paro, after they leave Mitzrayim, all the wars that they waged, the ones that were, meant to happen, right? They're all done by Nisim. Hashem yinalchem lachem. Hashem will fight for you, right? Hashem takes care of it, right? He did. So basically, what happens is that Moshe's complaint, if we look at it that way, then Moshe's complaint is that he basically minimized the value of Eretz Yisrael, right? And he says he didn't understand that all this was all that it was worth, all the Jewish people suffering. He did not, and because of this, the Zera Shimshon claims Moshe was denied the entry to Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so he says now we understand the difference, the basic the difficulty with the midrash, but he has a deeper question that he's going to ask now. So now he says, Aval adayin chova leinu lahavin hatam v'asvara shel Moshe. However, we still have to understand Moshe's reason and logic for what? For complaining about the suffering. Like, did he know that? Doesn't Moshe know how great and how precious Eretz Yisrael is? It seems, Meshevet Levi. Meshevet Levi lo savlu ol galut b'Mitzrayim. Moshe pirash Rashi al pasuk lechulu sipozechem insham. So he says, if you look at the midrash, if you look at what Rashi says on the pasuk lechulu sipozechem, Rashi there says that basically Shevet Levi never suffered the entire time.
Okay, I have no understanding of that whatsoever. You're talking about a despot, Paro. He hated the Hebrews. He was worried about the Hebrews. Why exclude the Levium? For what reason?
I really.
He doesn't have it. There's no reason to exclude them, period. The only thing that I could come up with in my own feeble mind is that where Hashem hardened Paro's heart, he convinced Paro within his heart not to enslave them.
I do have an answer for you.
Okay.
Possibly.
Go for it.
At the end of, I think, Vayechi, it talks about the taxes.
Yep.
And he says that he excludes
The Kohanim.
Rak Arei Kohanim or Levim.
Right.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
There were no priests at that time.
Yes, they were. What? It's
The Levium weren't the priests at that time.
Of the Egyptians.
The Egyptian priests.
Yes, but that means he saw the importance of priesthood.
Right.
Is that feeble?
No, because he hated the Jews, period.
All right. So I don't know the answer to your question. It's a really good question, actually, because I also had the same question when I was learning it. It's a basic question. It's such a basic question. How could we say that the Levim didn't suffer through this whole thing? Like, how do you ask it? I mean, it's nice to say that they didn't, but how do you answer that
How does
question?
he know who's the Levi and who's not?
Right, exactly. So I don't know the answer to that question, to be honest.
The Levim were happy the whole time.
I don't know if they were happy, but they didn't suffer to the point that Bnei Israel did. So I don't know the answer to that question. So I'd rather.
But it's a good question.
Yeah, it's a very good question. They were exempt from slavery. So it says here, according to Rashi, if you look at what Rashi says there, Rashi explains that when Paro told Moshe and Aaron to go back to their work, he was not referring to their slave labor. He was referring to the fact that they were exempt from slavery, but that doesn't mean they were exempt from work. They just weren't backbreaking slavery. So that may be sort of closer to what we're saying. However, again, I don't know the full answer to that. It's a question that I've heard this concept that Bnei Levi never suffered as much as the rest of Bnei Israel, and I still don't know the answer to that question. Something I have to ask. The Shevet Levi haya lo yoter chashuv mikol hashvatim. We know though that that Levi were more important than they were part of the legion, as he says, legiono shel melchu, that they were part of the royal legion. Vayam Moshe sover she'im zechut yerushat haaretz hu kol kach chashuv lisbol alei atzar galut lama nigru Shevet Levi midbar chashuv kazeh b'chi b'shvil shani zachar ifsadati, right? Because I'm a male Levite, right? If we know that the benefits of Eretz Yisrael are so great and the suffering is sort of in some way helpful to bring me back into that, bring us back to where we're supposed to be, then I want a piece of it too, as Moshe is saying, basically, right? He's basically saying, why? Because I'm a male Levi, right? Why should I not suffer, right? That's what he's saying here.
No pain, no gain.
Exactly. So he says here, rather we must say that Eretz Yisrael is not such a privilege for the Jewish people to be worth suffering, and therefore he says, why have you done evil to this people? In other words, he's saying is that Moshe concluded that it's clear that Moshe concluded that if some people are out of the picture and some people are in the picture, right, that means that Eretz Yisrael can't be that great, right? Basically saying is, the Zera Shimshon is bothered by this question, is how can Moshe, basically, in one answer he says, Moshe had to have known when Hashem told him, I'm going to take you out to the land of milk, flowing with milk and honey, right? So then Moshe sort of, in some ways, was basically belittling Eretz Yisrael. And now he's saying is, I don't understand, Hashem. I'm a Levi. I'm also hearing myself double. I'm a Levi, and I'm a male, so therefore I'm out of the picture. But if it's such a great reward, then in some ways, Eretz Yisrael can't be that great if I don't have to suffer, right? If it was really that great, everyone should suffer. That's what he's asking. You get the question, sir? You look confused.
It's basically from his personal experience.
Yeah.
He's saying if it's so good, I should be enduring it as well. And if I'm not, then something's wrong.
Exactly.
Along with the rest of the Levites.
Along the rest of the people of my Levite nation. Right. Toward the end of his life, Moshe says, now we know what happens at the end in Parshat Bet Hanan. What happens? Sheba lamut nitchabet harbe kedei la'avor ba bilvad. Right? Afilu below nitilat chelek ba. Right? What do we know in Parshat Bet Hanan? Moshe goes and davens to Hashem 515 times. Thank you. Right. So he davens to Hashem 515 different ways, and all he wants to do is see it. He's like, I don't want a piece of it. I just want to be able to see it. Right? That's what we need. We see it. Right? That's what it says. And this is why Hashem said to Milchama Za'at Ro'eh Aval Iyata Ro'eh. Right? Meaning you will not cross in to Eretz Yisrael. I have shown it to you, but you will not cross over to it. So basically what happens is, he's saying is that, and all those, the tefillot that Moshe did, and all that hard work we see, all the hard work that Moshe tried to put into trying to get in, or trying to at least to see, right? Hashem says, okay, this just shows you all the work, all the effort that just shows Moshe learned his lesson, and he learned that there is something really amazing about Eretz Yisrael, because otherwise you wouldn't have davened so hard for it, right? So basically what happened is, at the beginning, Moshe was saying is, I have some doubts about how great Eretz Yisrael really is, right? And now he says, wait a minute, now I get it, right? That's towards the end of his life. He says, now I get it. And once he gets it, he's like, now I've got to put in all my efforts to daven for it, because I might be missing out. The FOMO, the FOMO issue. Okay? And now he says, now he quotes it now. What happens is, now the Zera Shimshon quotes how do we know that Moshe eventually comes to recognize the uniqueness and how precious Eretz Yisrael really is? And it says, Kedita b'Yalkut Ruveni, al pasuk atatire, Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Katavti alecha shata chacham v'ata omer kain. Right? I told you that you are wise. What you said, and you say this, meaning Hashem says to him, I thought you were smart. I thought you knew better than this, right? And you say something like this against Eretz Yisrael. Chayecha, yesh lecha leida lodia tu b'acharitan shel Yisrael mirishitan shenatat lem b'Mitzrayim v'zeh midrash tamua. So he says like this: I swear to you, Hashem says to Moshe Kivyachol, I swear to you, you will eventually know yourself and make known to others that the eventual good of the fortune, the Bnei Israel suffering that they're going through right now, right? The initial suffering that they went through right now is is what they're going to happen. What's going to happen to them in Eretz Yisrael is going to be better than what they suffered in Eretz Mitzrayim. So he said, Moshe said, basically Hashem says to him, Moshe, you doubted me. You're supposed to be the smart guy here. You're the smart guy. You're supposed to know what's supposed to happen, and because you didn't know, now I'm going to make sure you, the smart guy, are not only going to realize it, you're going to be the one responsible for telling everyone how great Eretz Yisrael really is and how much I missed. Right? That's what he's saying. אבל העניין הוא בפרק ט"ו בשבת אמינא שהתלמיד חכם מצווין בני העיר לעשות מלאכתו ומזה נסתרה בסברת משה. So he's saying is that we have a midrash, a Gemara in Shabbat on Daf Kuf Yud Daled. It says here. So he says here that a real chacham, like right, the town is obligated to basically to support him, so that if he's a real Talmid Chacham. And this teaching kind of goes. So he says here, this teaching refutes Moshe's reasoning that the fact that the Levim did not receive a share in Eretz Yisrael, saying that is not so precious. The Fisha Shevet Levi Ligno Shel Melech, Uchtiv Yoru Mishpatecha LeYaakov, V'Toratcha Yisrael Ve'od Ketiv Alpiyam Yehel Kol Naga. Sorry. Okay. So basically, basically what happens is, according to this, is that Moshe, he says here, that the fact that the Levim did not receive a share is a sign that it was not so precious, right? As in fact, the contrary is true, right? Since Shevet Levi is part of Hashem's legion, they're responsible for teaching Torah and deciding, right, halachic matters that we know. So therefore, what? All of the Jewish people are actually commanded to do what for the Levim? To support them.
It means to make sure they don't have to do a shiabud in Mitzrayim. Exactly.
Therefore, the sections of fields that they were intended for the Levim were given to the Jewish people. They couldn't work the land. Why? Right? Because they couldn't work the land because what's the only obligation for Levim? To teach Torah. Right? So he says here, they give them the maser. The emergence that Eretz Yisrael was indeed most precious. The fact that the Leviim did not receive a share in Eretz Yisrael is not a sign that Eretz Yisrael is not precious. In fact, the opposite is due to their position as teachers that they're responsible for what? Always being teachers and always doing and adjudicating law and and passing on the law, and therefore Bnei Yisrael have an obligation to support them. So it's not that Moshe's thought process was, wait a minute, I don't get it. If Levi is supposed to, if the suffering is therefore going to be, if the Eretz Yisrael is going to be such a great reward as a result of what we did, the suffering that we suffered in Mitzrayim, so what Moshe is saying is, I want a piece of it too, right? Because I want that reward too. And if I don't get a reward, or because I'm Levi, I'm not getting a reward, then what does that mean? It means Eretz Yisrael is not that great, right? So the Gemara is basically saying is no, it is that great. It basically is showing in some way, whatever this means, that Moshe was flawed in his thinking. And basically what happened is that Bnei Israel are obligated to support the Levim because their only job is to teach Bnei Israel. And since their only job is to teach Bnei Israel, they don't have time to work. Their job is to be going around Eretz Yisrael and teaching.
Yeah, but not Mitzrayim.
No, not in Mitzrayim. But the point is that Moshe was thinking, as we said before, Moshe was thinking at the present moment. Right now, he's thinking is
it requires the land because
right,
it's going to be moving around everywhere they are. They're going to be everywhere.
Right. Exactly. So now, as it says before, Moshe before his death did exactly what Hashem said he was going to do. Moshe said to them how great Eretz Yisrael is. The Midrash we learned before, the Midrash that said that Hashem's going to say is, Moshe, you're the smart guy. You're the one who's supposed to know what I'm trying to do here. And you didn't do it. And therefore, I'm going to make sure that you're going to be the one who publicizes how great Eretz Yisrael is. And that's what happens.
He didn't do such a great job in the end because only 20% left.
Well, that was a different story, but that wasn't his fault that they sinned. You can't blame him for sinning, right? So if you look at the different, okay, now we say here, so this is why, so let me just go through here, and then he says here, okay, Moshe eventually understood and made known, made his job at the end. If we look through the Parshat of Dvarim, of how great of Sefer Dvarim, we see that Moshe constantly repeats the greatness of Eretz Yisrael, constantly. So this is really this drush. I'm skipping the last few lines here for a second, for intentionally, but basically that Moshe's error, if we can say that he made an error, is that basically that he misunderstood the greatness of Eretz Yisrael when he was at the moment. Again, we have to look at it from the moment that he was in. He was seeing Bnei Yisrael are suffering. I'm not, or my tribe is not. What's going on here? I don't get it, right? And Moshe and Hashem says to him, "Atatira, you will see now. You'll see the battle that what we're dealing with, or the suffering that Bnei Yisrael were dealing with at the time, right? You'll see that suffering, and it's the battle that we were supposed to fight against Mitzrayim. The suffering that we had was in lieu of that battle, and all the battles that and several of the battles that we had through the time that we moved into Eretz Yisrael, were done completely by miracles, as we see that many times over. So Hashem is basically saying in this midrash, at least the way I understand it, is that Moshe was, a new leader. He made a mistake. He misunderstood something that Hashem said, and his flaw was that he spoke in some ways. But what we do know is, like the Gemara says, is that tzaddikim, even the smallest thing, Hashem, judges much bigger, right? So Moshe's small flaw of like misunderstanding or misinterpreting the value of Eretz Yisrael caused him to be in some way, caused what happened later on down the line. Now, how does that answer the question later on? We say that what was the real reason? What does Moshe say was the reason that he wasn't allowed to Eretz Yisrael? Hit the rock. So how does that answer? How does this and that go together? I don't know yet, but maybe this was like the first flaw, and then that was like the real, final nail. But I don't know.
There's another midrash that I read.
Yep.
The reason he wasn't allowed to enter Eretz Yisrael because he didn't identify as a Hebrew when they asked him when he was in Midian.
That could be also. Yep. So what we see here, and
He said Ishmitzi.
yeah, he said.
Interesting.
So he said.
Interesting.
So, but that could also follow. By the way, that's also one of the reasons why his view about Eretz Yisrael, it could be that he was viewing it from the viewpoint of a Mitzri.
The other reason, there was one other reason that I heard,
Yeah.
and it makes a lot of sense, is that if Moshe would have entered Eretz Yisrael and he would have been buried in Eretz Yisrael, his kever may have been almost like idol worship.
Yeah. So that's the other. That is definitely a concern. How so?
Why we don't know where he's
Why we know where he's buried? Right. The answer. So the first midrash the first Torah that we did, it's also relatively short, was basically the idea is that Moshe complains about Paro, right? The first thing Moshe does as a leader after seeing this wonderful revelation that he just had, he goes to Mitzrayim. The first thing that happens, Paro doubles down, yes, yeah. And he and basically what happens is Bnei Yisrael have to suffer more. So the Hashem says, Moshe says to Hashem, that's not fair, right? What just happened here? You sent me down, you told me it's going to all be good, and that didn't happen. So Moshe says, so then he basically, that beginning, the Midrash then continues to say, is that Hashem says to Moshe, you complained now, so you'll see what happens. You'll see right now, you'll see the value of this suffering that just happened, that you're experiencing, but you won't see them go into Eretz Yisrael. It's because basically what happened is that, for those who weren't here, the Midrash basically, or the Zera Shimshon, goes through the idea that Moshe's thinking or logic was a little flawed. Basically, the idea was that his logic was that if the suffering was really meant to mean Eretz Yisrael was going to be so valuable, and it's because of the suffering that we had that it's going to be so sweet, then everyone should, not only Shevet Levi shouldn't be exempt from it. Meaning, if they're exempt from it, that means it can't be that good, because otherwise, no fair, right? So that was Moshe's thinking, and the Zera Shimshon basically explains that he just missed it. He was misaligned a little bit, and it wasn't that his complaint was a little bit out of character. However, we see that basically he failed to see a little bit how unique Eretz Yisrael is, and to recognize that the Jewish people suffering, Bnei Israel suffering then, and I would actually even say that even now, right? We have to, especially those who merit to live in Eretz Yisrael, we have to see that sometimes we fail to see things in a wider scope, right? We often say we miss that part. We often see that what's going on right now, we don't understand that there's like a wider picture that we have to understand. That's the first one. Okay, so that's Ted Zion only because of Yaakov's little question that he had.
Hope that helps.
Okay, I'll stop there. Is it you stop?
Yeah, we'll
Okay,
stop.
okay, great. Shkoyach. That's it, Zev? Okay,
Good job, Zev.
Chaim.
Thank you for being here.
Chaim.
Chaim. Shkoyach, good stuff.
How's that? Okay, we're gonna do in a second, we're gonna do, which one did I told Charles I was gonna do?
Stay tuned.